I can't believe they did this, to lock up His Highness after everything he has done for them. He is the reason Madzaka and the Council are in a safe position today, and this is how they repay him, leaving him almost blind locked up in his room. I need to find a way to meet up with him, if only to ensure him that he hasn't been betrayed by everyone yet, but with all these magic dampeners in place I can't do anything.
You could, if you were a bit smarter.
What? Galadea, how the hell have you got here? I thought they placed these anti-magic devices all over the place, and even if you somehow managed to cast a spell through them, they would still detect it and the guards would be all over you.
Maybe I'm just that good, but in all honesty the explanation is far simpler. You weren't with us when we visited Crimson Company office in Dulsmere, but they had a bunch of hidden passages behind the walls. I told Arius about them, and he liked the idea so much he installed a few of them in his mansion. That's probably why he accepted this house arrest without any fuss, although, well, things did not go exactly as planned. The council found secret passages that led from Arius's room to mine, and another that led outside to the bottom of the cliff, and they walled them up. Fortunately though, they haven't found all of them. There's still one left, one leading from my room outside, and it just so happens to go right next to your office, which is why I'm here right now. I'm actually going to do some shopping, since I need some reagents for my lab, so if you want something I can grab a few things. Don't worry, it's on me.
Wait, do you mean you were skulking behind my walls every time we were here?
Not every time. Only once or twice, mostly because we never stayed in Madzaka for long, but I admit I was curious to see what you were doing from time to time.
So that's where all these rumors originated from. I should have known you weren't just guessing about me and my students. Do you take some sick pleasure from watching other people when they think they are alone?
Only a bit, but I never actively spied on you. I just sometimes sneaked out in the middle of the night, sometimes outside, sometimes to Arius's quarters, and I just saw some things here and there. And despite of what you might think, I don't really care what you do in your private time, so I'm not the one spreading those tales. People do it themselves all the time, and if anything, it's good for you.
Yes, ruining my reputation as a teacher and mentor is always a good idea.
It's not ruining it, it just makes you more human. When people look at you, they see an imposing man with weird glowing eyes, always hiding behind a hood. They see a dangerous, possibly inhuman beast wielding power that terrifies them. But with those rumors, they see you're not just some mysterious sorcerer, but a regular person with flaws. And that helps you be Arius's mentor and second in command.
If you say so. But wait, Arius, is there a way to reach him through the secret passages?
As I said, no, they walled them off. But don't worry about your prince, he's not alone. I managed to smuggle in a little companion for him, though, to be more precise, said companion actually smuggled himself in. Money can be pretty sneaky for a skeleton. You'd be surprised how much you can accomplish if you're just a skull without a body.
I'm afraid to even ask. But if Arius has someone he knows to talk to, then I guess it's alright. But now that you're here, and now that I know you can leave at any time, I have to ask, why are you still with us? I thought you were just using Arius to find these necromancers who took you in, but we exhausted that lead and found nothing. There's no reason for you to hang around anymore.
Why, I grew fond of all of you, of course, especially our dear prince. But in reality, that explanation was just a partial reason. It all changed after that ruined city. Before, I was just looking out for my captors, but then I realized that maybe this entire resurrection thing could be useful. Arius wanted to bring back his sister, and I also had someone I wanted to bring back to life. So I followed you along because once again we had a common goal, and now that we know there is no secret to bring dead back to life, I'm just as lost as the rest of us. So I hang around, because this is the closest place I have to home now.
I see. And if you don't mind me asking, who is that person you wish to bring back? Your parents? Some lost love?
Nothing so altruistic, I'm afraid, but it would be better to show you, because if I tell you, you'd never believe me. So come here and put your hand on my chest, or just put your ear to it. I'm not trying to make this awkward, I'm just trying to explain something.
I can't believe this, but... wait. There's no heartbeat.
Yep, and no heart, as it happens. Back after that ritual my captors performed, I woke up with a massive scar on my chest. I noticed lack of heartbeat rather quickly, but it took me a few years to master the courage to actually investigate it, and when I opened myself, I found a bunch of these magical rocks, all arrayed in a weird shape and tied to my bones. I have no idea what that is and how it works, but it somehow keeps me going despite the fact I'm technically dead. All I know is the necromancers who did this to me were doing that to other people as well, so maybe I was just first successful experiment of some kind. But unless I find them, I'll never know, and I doubt I'll see them after all these years. They're either dead or returned to Goblin Republics.
Thank you for telling me. It explains quite a lot, and I will do my best to help you figure it out, if only out of personal curiosity. But does Arius know?
Of course. He noticed the scar during one of our late-night strategy meetings and asked me about it. Told him the truth and expected to be exiled, but he just accepted it. That's another reason why I stick around. But speaking of that, I've been looking into your history a bit, and I don't really understand why you are here either. Your pledge was to King Seren, and he's been dead for years now. With your skills and knowledge, you could go anywhere and live a luxurious life as some court mage, and yet you stay here, sleeping in tents and marching up and down this weird archipelago.
Because my pledge was to always keep an eye on both Arius and Leisha. I failed one of them, so I will not let my guard down ever again to protect the remaining one. Besides, Seren saved my life in battle several times during the rebellion, and despite his questionable morals and rough character, he was a dear friend to me. So I will keep an eye on his remaining kid for as long as I am able.
So you say. But there must be more to it. I know you often don't agree with him, and yet you support him no matter what. That goes beyond any pledge made to old friend. Come on, I bared my metaphorical heart to you. You can do the same.
There is nothing to bear. I was simply raised differently than you were, and going back on my word, even though the person I made the promise to is dead, is not something I would even consider. I'm with Arius no matter what, as you said. That's all that matters.
Fine then. Keep your secrets. Oh, you hear that? I think some of the guards heard our talk, so I'll be leaving. I'll be behind your wall every day at dusk and dawn, so if you'll figure out a plan what we should do next, let me know.
The plan is to wait. This is what His Highness wants, and so that is what we will do, for now at least. From what I've heard, the war is going pretty well, so hopefully a ceasefire will be signed soon and we'll be able to get out of here. I just hope whatever these Commonwealth people planned won't happen until then. In the middle of hot summer of 1144, something odd happened in Madzaka. Something that made a lot of citizens talk in hushed voices about wild and mostly completely insane conspiracy theories. In the dead of night, a small group of badly damaged ships made their way into port and released a small group of rather peculiar-looking individuals who made their way into council halls. And as people woke up, they learned from town criers and newspapers that said individuals were none other but Lord Governor Arius Erigen himself, together with his retainers, coming back from the expedition. Immediately, some started to ask why would the prince sneak into the city like a thief in the middle of the night, but the council also provided an answer to that question: sickness. According to official statement from colonial government, Lord Arius and some of his closest followers, those who explored with him deepest depths of the mysterious Pillared City, apparently showed symptoms of some unknown and potentially dangerous disease, and so they made their way to Lord Governor's mansion and locked themselves in to avoid spreading it. In the meantime, best and brightest medical minds of Madzaka were to work on figuring out what this mysterious disease was and how to remove it, though said statement caused some confusion amongst medics and doctors of Madzaka, none of which were actually called to the mansion. Nonetheless, Lord Erigen and his retainers were now confined to their quarters, and their home was surrounded by a cordon of city guards, who made sure that no overzealous civilian would try to go and meet the prince. Of course, such secrecy was bound to cause rumors, and before the day was done, a crowd gathered just in front of the cordon and demanded to see their leader, and after several minutes of shouting, they were granted their wish, as Lord Arius appeared in the window and waved to the crowd, but he also told them to disperse and stay away for their own safety. The people returned to their homes, still confused and scared about the unknown illness, but before the week was done, everyone almost completely forgot about the whole affair. Erigen was back, and so everything was in order, and so life in Madzaka continued as usual, though some continued to insist on meeting the prince face to face and ask him about his expedition. Instead, they directed these questions to others who came back from it, a group of soldiers who accompanied the prince since he left Laok Fen, but these soldiers were nowhere to be found. As soon as the council learned of them, they were sent to a temporary army camp south of the city, where another wave of reinforcements was prepared to be sent to the front against Emerald Colonies. It wasn't enough to dissuade curious minds though, and several people ventured into said camp to interview the soldiers who, apparently, were not suffering from the same disease their commander caught. But while this one thing sparked some more wild theories, the truth turned out to be a bit less fascinating. For the troops that came back from the area had no idea what happened beneath the pillared city. Only Lord Arius and his closest followers were there, and ever since they came back outside, they never once shared what they found. The soldiers had some ideas of their own, especially regarding the cloud of flames and smoke that flew into the sky, but they were just speculations, and if some of the soldiers actually knew what happened, they were not willing to share. And so, curious citizens returned to their lives, unaware of the revelations found in the pillared city, and without deadly disease rampaging in the streets, life continued on, with war against Emerald Colonies once again moving to the forefront of public attention. And there certainly was a lot to talk about, for Madzakan forces were on a roll and scored victory after victory against their enemies, although some noticed that the main reason for it was also the main cause for concern. That reason was a seeming disappearance of Lady Raylis Servinhart, leader of the Emerald forces in the area. It was known that she recently went on a campaign somewhere deeper in the archipelago, but the fact that she still decided to not come back, even as her own capital was cut off from the rest of her territories, made some of the more paranoid citizens back in Madzaka rather scared. For as Elven forces proved before, they were capable of launching attacks deep behind colonial lines, and so massive army could suddenly appear out of nowhere and completely demolish Madzaka before anyone could react. Still, those concerns were always downplayed by the council, which stated that they're prepared across the entire nation, and so people mostly focused on good news like occupation of Rant, where pragmatic goblin majority quickly pledged their loyalty to Madzaka and moved on with their lives as if nothing happened, a mindset that, while scoffed at by many, was one of the main reasons why these small greenskins were now pretty much the most influential race in the world. But no matter what Lady Raylis had planned, if she even had planned anything, it was undeniable that armies marching under the Trident were winning time and again, and now, with General Vestron's plan in motion, they were already preparing to strike against the coastal city of Las Veras, organizational and political center of Emerald Colonies. It was a large and well-defended city, protected by strong walls and numerous garrison, and an approach to it was additionally covered by thick forests that surrounded it. In these woods, elves maintained their forestry-based economy, but in times of war they could also hide a massive army there, and since forests around Las Veras were one of the largest and most dense in the entire archipelago, General Brimir was a bit hesitant to march into them. At the same time, though, taking over Rant opened up another avenue of approach. Before, Madzakan troops could only attack from the northwest, a direction that would force them to march for almost an entire month across deep, dark forests where defenders of Emerald Capital could organize ambushes. The road from Rant, however, was much more open, and as Brimir's scouts, mechanical and living ones, reported, it was mostly clear, and so preparations were made to move out and tear out the heart of Servinhart family in the archipelago. Of course, it would be a while before the army could move on again, for their supply lines were now stretched even more, but Brimir already began his offensive by sending squadrons of his riders deep into enemy territory to cause chaos and discontent among the elves. Dwarf's plan was simple: force rural population around Las Veras into the walls, where they would eat through any supplies Emerald army had prepared for the siege. For this time, the battle wouldn't just be a regular assault, as Brimir decided to surround the city first, together with heavy fleet that already blocked the bay, and force the defenders to surrender. or, if that failed, simply wait for more reinforcements. Emerald forces were not going to just sit and do nothing though, and soon an alarming message reached Madzakan capital from the floating city of Viaform, home of the Navians. The message, sent by one of the researchers sent there to investigate these mysterious water-based beings, was simple and to the point. Hostile ships, elven, goblin and even frostling ones, were spotted moving in the direction of the city, and Northern Fleet, which was moving south to reinforce, was still too far away to do anything about it. The Navians themselves, through their own inexplicable means, seemed to be aware of the incursion and prepared for combat, but it seemed that they would not be able to hold against a fleet of warships, and so emergency order was sent to all nearby settlements to send all available drones into the area to help defend it. Of course, by themselves drones could not stop a fleet either, but they could simply throw themselves at it and cause enough damage for the Navians to prevail. A cloud of machines raced towards the city and arrived just in time, just as first green sails appeared on the horizon. Most of Madzakan's scholars were already gone, but a handful stayed to record the fight, and what they wrote proved that Navians were not as docile and peaceful as everyone thought. For as green-sailed ships appeared on the horizon, the locals armed themselves in silence, and then, arrayed in a circle formation, began humming some distant but rhythmic melody that resonated across the waves for dozens of kilometers. As they hummed, waves nearly completely stopped, leaving the sea almost flat and undisturbed, and slowing Emerald advance to a crawl. And then the song suddenly stopped and, in complete silence, the Navians raised their weapons and charged at approaching foes before they could react. And as far as military maneuvers go, this one proved to be executed flawlessly, for it allowed the watery beings to rush at enemy force before it could combine its numbers. The elves, perhaps expecting to easily break the Navians just like before, approached from two sides, with their combat fleet moving in from one direction, while transports with elves, frostlings and goblins approached from the other, perhaps to look more intimidating. And if the waves and wind kept pushing them forward, they would simply group up and attack as one formation, but now that plan was out of the window, and amongst first drops of rain, crews of Emerald transport ships suddenly noticed a wave of aquatic warriors charging towards them. Spells and arrows crossed the air, and soon first sailors and soldiers fell dead on their decks, while in the background a cloud of Madzakan drones rushed in to intercept incoming elven frigates and cruisers, and already one could see explosions as first machines were struck by arrows and ballista bolts. That, however, was just a distraction to delay the main fleet from the Navian warriors. But as elven soldiers on the transports noticed, the first attack launched at them, while surprising, was not exactly all that powerful, and soon troops massed on decks and prepared to retaliate, casting their own spells and launching their own missiles. This counterattack struck many of the Navians who fell into the waves, but in that moment something strange happened, something that made every soldier and sailor in Emerald Fleet realize that their numbers may not be enough to win. For although some watery warriors dissipated into the waves, they soon rised up from them, as if pouring rain was rebuilding their bodies. Mere moments after first elven counterattack, its effects were completely negated and the Navians were standing once more readying their bows, while on both sides their watery steeds splashed on, carrying waves of knights charging across the sea. The horses moved at speeds that would leave most regular horses way behind, and soon, like a wave, they crashed into approaching ships and spilled their riders all over decks. The soldiers tried to resist, but with their vessels shaking underneath them, and with enemies made seemingly out of impossible to damage water, they could not hold. And soon entire decks were cleared as Emerald troops were either pierced by lancers or thrown overboard and dragged into the depths by their silent foes. Several minutes later, all three transport ships were cleared, and while the Navians took some losses while they drowned their foes, especially to frostling mages who simply froze them and shattered them, they were already forming their numbers back, thanks to rain falling from the sky. Seeing that, the morale of Emerald Fleet collapsed, but its commander kept pushing her men forward. The drones, while certainly dangerous, proved to be less deadly than usual, and were shot down before they could cause too much damage. though by the time last of the transports was cleared, Elven frigates and cruisers were already charred, and their crews had to fight at least a dozen fires all over the fleet. But with all drones shot down, they could now turn their attention against the Navians and avenge their comrades from transports. But as warships moved at glacial speeds towards their foes, due to lack of wind, the Navians simply reformed and, just like before, charged in once again. But elves still had one surprise left in store, the naval sorcerers who realized by now that healing rain that invigorated the Navians was magical in origin, and prepared an incantation of their own to dispel it. With a show of tremendous magical power, the mages pushed the clouds away and, with winds once again blowing in the sails, Emerald Fleet charged forward, crashing into approaching warriors, and, through even more impressive magic, even setting some of them on fire. Sizzling noise and steam filled the air, but it was not enough to stop the Navians, who simply kept charging on, and soon completely swarmed approaching vessels, spreading both water and flames all over them. And then, Elven warriors realized to their horror that what was charging at them was, quite literally, a mass of furious, bubbling, boiling water. The less is said about what happened afterwards the better, but some reports claim that Emerald sailors took their own lives to avoid being boiled alive. Half an hour later, there was not even a single sign that a naval battle took place there. The ships were dragged underwater, the sea was quiet, and the Navians returned to their homes in complete silence as if nothing happened, without taking even a single look at colonial citizens, who stared at them in utter shock. Which, moments later, prompted Madzakan scholars to send the following message back home. Battle won, it said. Complete victory, Emerald Fleet destroyed. Please send reinforcements anyway. The Navian victory, while unsettling for those who witnessed it, was nonetheless yet another reason why General Vestron decided to move out against Las Veras as quickly as possible. Seeing that another naval group was destroyed, he argued that if Lady Rayleigh wanted to organize a counterattack, she was probably now out of warships that could escort it to its destination, and so he ordered his forces to march towards Emerald Capital and prepare for a siege. Said advance, however, was nothing like rapid strikes at two previous cities. This time, the Madzakan army advanced slowly and meticulously, sending scouts far ahead of them to ensure that no surprise would suddenly appear from amongst the trees. More importantly, though, Dwarven General knew that a steady stream of reinforcements was heading south from home territories, and so every day he waited meant that he would be able to bring more forces to assault Elven fortifications. Of course, elves could reinforce their own forces as well, at least in theory, and while defenders of Las Veras prepared as best as time allowed them and raised many citizens as temporary militia to bolster their numbers, they simply had no means of gathering any significant amount of troops due to Madzakan blockade. At this point, Las Veras was completely surrounded on both land and sea, and its garrison would have to be enough. After Madzakan light fleet was severely damaged, elves hoped to receive support from home or other colonial territories, but arrival of heavy fleet dismantled these plans completely. What's more, defeat at Navian settlement reduced number of Emerald Colonial Navy even more, and even the thorn in their side, the light fleet, was rescued and linked up with Madzakan warships, forming a formidable blockade in front of the bay where Las Veras was located in. With enemies approaching from all sides, Emerald defenders could only reinforce their fortifications as best as they could and await inevitable assault, and hope that their limited but experienced numbers would be enough to stop it. But even as armies of Madzaka were moving towards Emerald Capital, more and more troops were raised back home, mostly in Madzaka itself as well as in Dawsmere, simply because these two settlements had best infrastructure to train soldiers quickly and efficiently. But while most of industrial effort was placed on producing more and more war machines, tanks, cannons, gyrocopters and muskets, a sizable investment was also made into raising another company of knights.
Recent rapid industrialization of Madzaka created a significant number of newly rich, patriotic citizens who were eager to offer their service to the army, usually to win some glory and honor to their ever-growing noble houses, but at the same time they were not too keen on serving just as musket-wielding grunts, or grease monkeys piloting tanks or shooting cannons. As such, these people pooled their resources and, when their efforts were recognized, Ministry of Warfare threw in the rest of the money they needed to organize yet another fully operational company of knights. But said knights were not just outdated, old-fashioned relics of the past. Instead, they perfectly merged old tradition of mounted warfare with everything new Madzakan factories could offer. The knights and their steeds wore heavy plate armor made in industrial foundries, which, while not very ornamental, offered better protection and flexibility. Their weapons, uniform and organized, could easily be maintained on the march, and, more importantly, they now also had a little surprise in form of a brace of flintlock pistols tied to their saddles. Firearms proved to be way too effective to just ignore them, and so these new knights would ride into battle and fire their weapons before charging, which was bound to make their attacks even more devastating. But while they were certainly going to be very useful in the war, everyone agreed that they were more of an inspiring piece to place on the battlefield to bolster morale of allies and terrify their foes, rather than a battle-changing elite squadron that knights of old were. Still, Royal Knights of the Trident proved their worth time and again, and so their new follow-ups were holding their heads high and eagerly prepared to depart south where, as they hoped, there would be plenty of chances for them to win even more glory for themselves. But there was a bit of a side effect to their heads being held so high in the air all the time, for they were the first ones to notice that, one day, the sky above them suddenly shattered and plunged the world into gloomy darkness.
Wait, it gets better. When the merchant woke up, his entire skeleton was missing, and the necromancer was never heard from again. Ah, those were the good days of illegal necromancy. You really had to work hard to get all the material you needed for your experiments. Can't believe how easy the kids have it these days. And they don't even need to look like me because they figured out how to preserve themselves better. Anyway, it looks like your glass is empty. Do you want me to pour you another one? I'll pass, thank you. It's early afternoon and you already made 3 drinks for me. I should be looking for ways to convince the council to listen to me instead of just sitting here boozing all day. Not that they actually want to listen to me, and besides I really should stop. I still feel the one you gave me 2 nights ago. You were brooding, your highness, and it was time for you to sleep, so I made you a special one. Nothing knocks out a man faster than a generous azure lagoon. But anyway, just look outside. It's so dark and gloomy today. Perfect weather to just stay in your room and relax. Maybe, but I still have some responsibilities, no matter what the council says. Maybe I should try to write a letter and ask one of the guards to deliver it. If they don't want to come to me, then no need for that, Arius. You're getting out of here right now with me. What the? Arcadian, why the hell are you outside of the window? How are you even there? No time for questions. Grab your things and get ready to move out. We're leaving as soon as we're able. Pardon me for being suspicious, but I don't exactly believe you. You're one of the people who got me locked up in the first place. Yes, and I admit now that it was a mistake. Come on, Arius, please. We don't have much time before the councillors come here with an entire company of the guards. You can trust him, your highness. Arcadian already freed me and Galadea, and believe me, he had a good reason for it. Mr. Storm, you're also here. Well, if you say it's alright, let me just quickly grab my things. Manuel, go with them. Aye, we can take the skeleton as well, but hurry up. And here, have a new pair of glasses. These should help you see what is going on, because if I told you, I don't think you would believe me. What in the name of... Arcadian, you stole one of our airships? 2 of them, to be more precise. One is already in the air with Galadea, her Shamblers, Zabulus, and supplies for the journey. And I'm not stealing them. Technically, I'm still civilian governor, and they were made in my factories, so in light of the law, they belong to me. Not sure how long that will hold, though, so come on. We need to fly away now. Arcadian, wait. What the hell is going on? Why are you acting so scared? Because it seems that fireball that went into the sky finally reached its target, and it's not looking pretty for us. Just look into the sky. Fine, but... Hold on a second. I thought it's dark and gloomy outside, but there's not even a single cloud, and yet it is so dark. Is it some kind of an eclipse? Worse. Much worse. It happened in the morning, less than an hour after sunrise. At first I had no idea what it could mean, but I've been thinking about all these revelations you brought back from this Commonwealth facility and tried to piece together some explanation. You mentioned that in the very first log of this director, he mentioned something about a lens used to make this world warmer. You know, like using a magnifying glass to burn a hole in a piece of paper or something like that. It sounded unreal at first, for the scope of such a structure must have been astronomical, but after the sun went dark I realized what probably happened. If I understand correctly, the Commonwealth aimed their weapon not at us but at that very lens, and though it took months, they now accomplished their goal. Stars. How could they even achieve something like that? Just how much distance that weapon must have gone through? If they can make an entire world to suit their needs, then I doubt firing something at the sun was overly problematic for them. I believe other people may have some theories, but technology behind it doesn't matter. The important part is what effect it will have on us. And if those logs are to be believed, then before this lens was installed our world was completely covered in ice and completely unlivable. So I think we can safely assume that without something to magnify power of the sun, we will soon see a massive world-spanning ice age. And I believe only one kind of creature could survive the cold that's coming. The Frostlings, who are either dead or lost in the underground caves. Stars, what if the Archmage knew? What if this was his way to prepare for this? I thought the same thing, but if he knew that, then he should have said so instead of going to war against the rest of the world. And besides, it doesn't matter now. The Frostlings are gone and their mages are dead, so there is no way to turn us into more cold-resistant beings. The only option I can think right now is to either flee into this underground network of caves and hope for the best, but we'll probably never be able to leave them again once the real cold starts. Or we could follow that lead Zabalos mentioned. I talked with her and she seems determined that this mysterious power that lives near Bernoth can help us prevent this disaster. And I'd say it sounds better than just hiding in some cave forever. Agreed. But still, why are we fleeing like thieves? Shouldn't this situation cause the Council to acknowledge the threat? They did. But they also acknowledged that this is all your fault for chasing these Commonwealth people and pushing them against the wall. And since the people are starting to panic, they want to make a show of force and punish you. They're probably already on their way with a company of guardsmen. I see. And I'd say we run. Do you think they'll chase us? They can try, but these are only 2 operational airships left. Other ones had a bit of an accident an hour ago. Now, let's go. This is probably the last time we'll ever see Madzaka, so take a good look. And here I thought I was finally done running away in my life. How does one react to the world suddenly going dark? It wasn't a complete darkness, sure. It was more like the sun simply dimmed its rays, turning sunny day into rainy dusk. But it did not stop people across the world from being confused beyond words by this sudden, inexplicable phenomenon. Before first day was over, thousands upon thousands of theories to explain it were made up, some close to the truth, but most of them dead wrong. But while people speculated and gazed up into the sky in confusion, almost everyone, silently, hoped that this is just a temporary situation. It will fix itself, was the general opinion, usually followed by some hopeful explanation that masked just how nervous everyone was. But some people were more concerned than others, especially those educated enough to understand what this sudden twilight meant for the world. Dimmed sunlight was just a start of the problem. What it would do to every society around the globe was the real issue. Lack of proper sunlight would lead to cold. Cold would lead to climate change. Climate change would, in all probabilities, lead to complete collapse of agriculture around the world, especially when paired with lack of light. Places like Indecisive Archipelago where Madzaka lied were to be least affected, for a while at least, for they were naturally warm due to being placed almost on the equator, but areas like the Empire would soon suffer from massive food shortages that were bound to force this usually isolationist nation to leave their borders to look for quite literal greener pastures. And all that was just an optimistic option. For a number of pessimists, or realists as they called themselves, seemed to be sure that this sudden darkness meant a global ice age and complete, eventual extinction of all life around the world. But such voices were quickly drowned out by either more crazy theories, like ones that claimed that it was punishment of the stars themselves, but even more so, these doomsayers were simply ignored by majority of the population, who, perhaps simply to not acknowledge their own fear, believed that the problem would resolve itself. And there certainly were a lot more pressing matters to deal with, for due to this surprising development, a lot of the more unreasonable people around the world thought that they could do whatever they wanted as, in their minds, end times were already upon them. In Madzaka alone, several murders were committed in the open before the now dark sun finally set, and the Temple of Azure Heart was burnt to the ground by star cultists, who then clashed with crystal priests in the street, leading to even more casualties. And all that chaos must have gone to Governor Arcadian's head as well, at least according to news released in the evening by the council. For the governor, now former one, stole 2 of the airships and sabotaged the other ones to prevent pursuit, and fled the city in unknown direction. What's worse, he also broke his friend Arius out from his house arrest, and, as was said before, Lord Erigen and his retainers were quarantined due to their mysterious disease. No one could tell why Arcadian committed such a deranged act, but one thing was sure. Both former governors were now free of their bounds and potentially dangerous, and so Madzakan Council, under temporary rule of newly appointed Lord Governor Gerstein, proclaimed that all citizens should stay as far away as possible from their former escaped leaders and don't offer them any help for their own safety. Instead, they should focus back on the war, which was now in the deciding phase, and remain calm until some problem resolved itself, even though, as the council well knew, it was nothing but an outright lie. And so, first day of darkness came to an end, and Madzaka was a different state when the twin moons came up. Its former leaders were now wanted fugitives, and though many wondered why Arius and Arcadian would commit such a dangerous act, everyone were more focused on the sun, and on the news from the front, where forces of General Vestrand continued their siege, as if nothing happened. That statement, of course, could not be further from the truth. In reality, Madzakan soldiers, just like everyone else, were confused and scared by the sudden dimming of the sun, but they still continued their operations. Both Brimir and Madzakan politicians knew that idle hands and idle minds in a situation like that were bound to cause trouble, and so even though he was unwilling to storm the walls so quickly, Colonial General ordered his men to prepare themselves for an assault. Cannons rumbled day and night, lobbing shells over emerald walls to destroy defenders' infrastructure and to dissolve their morale, and after 2 weeks of constant bombardment, large portions of the city were on fire, increasing chaos created by both darkness and siege even more. The garrison and civilians of Las Veras had not even a single moment to rest, for they had to fight flames and dodge cannon rounds day and night, and slowly but surely their morale started to erode even before the attack began. Even worse, at the first few days of siege, the Madzakan army was bolstered by reinforcements from home, in form of 6 gyrocopters that immediately began raids against the walls and the city itself, using their speed and mobility to evade defenders and drop incendiary bombs all over the city. In the distance, naval cannons thundered in the bay, blasting the fort that protected entrance into it, where a large number of merchant and civilian ships were now being commandeered by desperate soldiers from the garrison, who looked for any advantage they could get. After more than 2 weeks of that chaos, it was undeniable that Las Veras was doomed. No reinforcements from Lady Servanheart were coming, and the walls and the city behind it were more and more damaged with every passing hour, as Madzakan artillery pummeled it without repercussions. The defenders might have been well-trained and experienced soldiers, but without artillery of their own they could simply sit behind their fortifications and wait, or, as it happened, they could try and seize the initiative and take the fight to their besiegers. And so, After yet another dark night of fighting flames and avoiding artillery attacks, the gates of Las Veras were suddenly thrown open, and several companies from the garrison, elves, goblins, and even frostlings, charged outside with just one objective: silence Madzakan cannons. As was learned later, after the battle, they also had another less glorious but just as vital goal. They were to draw the attention of attacking force and prevent it from moving its flame tanks even closer and setting fire to the city. Las Veras, like most other Emerald settlements, was built almost exclusively out of wood, which certainly made it pleasant to look at and live in, but it also made it decidedly less effective when it came to fire prevention, and both sides knew it. Over the course of their siege, Madzakans slowly advanced their flame tanks closer and closer to the walls to wait for a good opportunity to use them, and this sudden attack from the garrison was sent precisely to not give them that opportunity. And it had to be said, when the gates opened, colonial army did pause out of sheer shock caused by creatures that rushed out. It was an entire swarm of these bizarre, spider-like abominations with upper bodies of elven women. With high-pitched shrieks, these amalgamations of legs and arms threw themselves forward, brandishing heavy spears and casting spells towards approaching tanks and gunners manning the cannons. From the walls, longbowmen and mages launched strike after strike, and while most magical attacks were ineffective against war machines, bolts of electricity thrown by emerald sorcerers were more than dangerous, as thick metal armor offered no protection against them, and, if anything, only amplified destructive potential of these spells. It wasn't long before first machines stopped dead in their tracks, with their crews dead inside, but it was too little too late, and the assault continued. On the flank where a group of Frostling warriors led the advance, tanks simply melted them away, setting the gatehouse behind them ablaze in the process. In the center, gyrocopters flew forward ahead of the main force and drowned approaching elves and their spider-like monstrosities in a hailstorm of explosives. Said explosives, as was said before though, were not all that deadly, but when massed in such numbers they caused tremendous damage to approaching forces, and completely scattered and confused them with never-ending explosions. All across the line, guns fired without a break, and it was clear that defenders knew their attack was nothing but a suicide, and yet they kept charging on, screaming their defiance in the face of overwhelming odds. A squadron of mountain mages suddenly disappeared and re-emerged few hundred meters further amongst Madzakan forces and bombarded everyone around them with electric bolts. Spiders charged in as well, swarming everyone they could find, including some of the Tigran and Dwarven riders who were too slow or too confused to flee, and now were being torn apart by shrieking mindless monstrosities that seemed to know only furious rage. But perhaps one of the most demoralizing moments for Madzakans happened when one of the charging elves fired a single arrow at one of colonial gyrocopters and killed its pilot on the spot, forcing the machine to crash to the ground and explode in a cloud of shrapnel that killed and wounded dozens of soldiers around, though some of these soldiers happened to be defenders of the city itself. But despite their heroic charge and efforts and their suicidal bravery, they could not stop the inevitable. Few moments later, Madzakans counterattacked and completely wiped out soldiers sent against them. Only a handful of elves survived and started to limp back towards the gate, but they never reached it, as gyrocopters and cannons turned them into gory paste before they could reach safety. Upon seeing that, already low morale of the garrison almost completely shattered. With their gates broken down by artillery, with their professional soldiers dead in the field, remaining defenders of Las Veras started to melt away. Some dropped their weapons and surrendered, placing their faith in Madzakan hands, and were quickly rounded up and sent outside of the city under guard. Some fled into the maze of streets, abandoned their uniforms and hoped to pass as ordinary citizens. Some tried to stand and fight, but were quickly overwhelmed, and soon only monstrous spider hybrids were left, driven by their mindless, animalistic rage. A handful of sorcerers from School of the Storm tried to resist as well, but just as they were preparing another incantation, ones they used to strike targets outside of the walls, a unit of tanks rolled through the gates and, without even stopping, engulfed the mages in flames. The screams died down moments later, and when the flames dissipated, all of the mages were reduced into a charred pile of corpses, contorted into twisted shapes. Not one of them managed to flee, and the tanks simply rolled over their bodies and moved on, while on the wall's last group of spiders, backed into a corner, was burned away as well, the surreal shrieks echoing in the wind. Las Veras was captured, and Brimir immediately ordered his men to stop and sent a negotiator to discuss unconditional surrender of the city. But even though Madzakans were victorious, there was no cheering and no celebrations. Soldiers simply stood around in falling darkness, even though it was still early afternoon, looking at burned and mangled corpses of friends and foes around them and wondered, sure, they won. But in light of recent events, will that victory mean anything? But of course, there was no answer to that question. They could only look up into the sky and watch the small, pale dot of the sun and hope that things will go back to normal soon, and everything, no matter what, will be fine. And that's pretty much how it went. After the walls fell, dealing with any organized defenders was just a matter of time. Some pockets of resistance still hold on deeper in the city, but it's mostly militia and regular citizens, led by last remaining experienced warriors. But since we cleared out the docks, it allowed our ships to move in closer, and with naval cannons providing fire support, I give Knife-Ears a day at most. That is, unless they want us to turn several districts of their city into rubble.
Understood. Congratulations on your victory then, General, but I must also ask you to keep your men on a tight leash and rein in any acts of aggression before they escalate. Not only will it unnecessarily damage the city, which we will then have to rebuild ourselves, but also because the situation is rather complicated right now, and not just because of the war back on the continent. That entire sun business has everyone on edge as well, so we should act carefully to avoid spreading even more discontent, especially amongst superstitious people, which, to my endless disappointment, are more numerous than one would expect in these enlightened times.
And do you blame them? Sure, elves are more superstitious than we are, and you could easily see it during our assault when they were constantly looking up to the sky, but my boys and girls are not exactly happy about this business either. And neither am I, to be honest. It feels odd to look into the sky and see the sun just as a small dot of light, especially since now you can also see the stars during the day. Do we know what the hell even happened?
We have some suspicions, yes, but nothing solid for now. Our observatories across the entire region are trying to make sense of it, but the council itself is divided. Some believe that this is some kind of natural phenomenon and will pass on its own. Some more nervous ones claim that the sun itself is dying. A small faction believes that these Commonwealth people actually did something to it, but there's also a handful who claim that this is a sign of stars themselves punishing us for constant war. They already took to the streets and started forming some odd, pacifistic repentance cult.
Yes, that's probably to be expected. But what do you think, personally, not as Lord Governor?
I agree with Arius. I believe in his story, or, to be more precise, I believe that this so-called director told him all this, and he believes it. I have problems wrapping my head around their threat, though. If they were really so advanced, then how just a small expedition managed to take them out? Also, if their empire really spanned the stars, then why did they never show up to help them? But all of this is just pointless speculation at this point. I believe the threat is real, and that what Arcadian said few days ago before he escaped with Arius was true, that we're about to see significant drop in temperature and may not be able to survive it. But unlike Arius, I do not think that we should just drop everything and trust some outlandish fey entity made of darkness and secrets to guide our efforts. He believes that some unnatural power can help him. I believe that we can save ourselves through proper planning and hard work.
Sounds good to me. Never trusted this magical thing they brought with them from Larkfen. But what exactly do you plan to do then? Should we stop our campaign against Emerald Colonies?
No. We will continue, but not for conquest. I need you to ensure that the city of Caerdon is safe, and right now it's still a bit too close to the front lines for us to really develop it.
Sure, I see what you're thinking. You want to hide in those caves and weather the cold there, right?
Correct. As you said yourselves, they are very expansive, and with those lava flows you mentioned, we should be able to keep ourselves down there nice and warm. There is, of course, the matter of food, but I talked with Minister of Agriculture, and she believes that with enough time we should be able to prepare these caves to grow at least some specialized crops. It won't be anything fancy, but if we are to prepare for the wars, then we can't worry about quality and should focus on quantity first and foremost. And somehow I feel that we'll have to fit a lot of people into this cave. This archipelago is warm, made even warmer due to constant volcanic activity, but other continents, except for that abandoned Tigran one, are not. If someone will feel the effects of this coming darkness first, it's going to be the Empire, and I doubt they'll just stay in the north and do nothing.
They won't. As soon as they realize something is wrong, they will probably send invasion force here, though some force will probably look for help from that Azure Heart thing. Anyway, I think I understand what you want me to do. Keep pushing deeper in Emerald territory and ensure they won't suddenly appear somewhere near Caerdon.
Exactly. Also, we will probably need all resources we can get for this project. Additionally, I have no doubts there are other entrances to this underworld, but so far we haven't found any of them, so I'd rather not risk it. Which is why I will now give you new orders. General Vestrand, you are to take your forces further southwest and eliminate any opposition from Emerald Colonies. They will thank us for this, even though for now they will surely not understand that we're doing this for everyone.
Are we though? Sure, we may fit a lot of people down there, but I doubt supplying them will be easy.
It won't be, but we have to try. We have an obligation to do so. I have this obligation as Lord Governor.
Ah yes, that. Now that Arcadian is gone, have you decided who to choose as civilian governor?
There won't be one. The council agreed on an emergency legislation that combines both military and civilian officers into one.
I see. So you're back in charge of Madzaka then. Good for you.
I'm not doing this to satisfy my greed, General, but to ensure we can survive this crisis. I hope you understand.
Sure thing, as long as my paycheck arrives on time. But on another note, do you plan to chase Arius and his merry men after they fled from right under your nose?
No. For one, Arcadian ensured that we have nothing to pursue them with, and he and his assistants sabotaged our airships and gyrocopters. But it doesn't matter, we're better off without young Erigen. His presence would only cause a split between those who would want to follow him on his insane chase, and those who want to save themselves properly. So I'd say let him go. If he really believes there's some mysterious power that can help us, then let him prove it, as long as it doesn't affect our own efforts, that is. But all cities have been informed about his escape, so I doubt he'll receive any support from Madzaka. It's a shame, really. I'm sure he could have been an amazing asset in our Caerdon plan, but I guess we'll have to make do, just as we did before he arrived. We'll be fine, General. Now let's get to work to ensure it.